Welcome back to the Cyber Executive, the podcast where we mix technology, risk, and leadership like a cocktail you didn't know you needed, but now you can't live without. I am your host, Marc Ashworth, and today I'm excited about our guest. He is a professor at the SANS Institute and the host of my favorite daily podcast, the ISE Stormcast, Dr. Johannes Ulrich. Professor, thanks for jumping on the mic with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to do me a quick favor and tap that follow button on your favorite podcast app and share the Cyber Executive with your friends, coworkers, or that one person IT who sighs loudly every time someone clicks a suspicious link. Let's spread the cyber love. All right. So, Johannes, one of the things on your podcast that I enjoy hearing about every day is around the different types of malware that you're seeing, the different threats. I'm curious, what recent threat trends or attacker techniques have surprised you the most in this past year?
Really, how much old stuff we still see, and old stuff in new shapes. There was actually just last week an interesting paper. I think I actually mentioned it about how many of these 90s style vulnerabilities, like buffer overflows and cross-site scripting, SQL injection, such, specifically infect and affect our security devices. And that always surprises me. I'm not sure it should still surprise me, but it's certainly one of those things that I think a lot of people are still not aware of. I've been talking about this for a while. That in particular enterprise security device, actually, they use an awful lot of really ugly legacy code if you sort of scratch below the shiny surface.
Yeah, and you hear when there's a breach and everything, it's not the new stuff that's happening, or very
Yeah.
rarely. It's that old stuff that's out there, and that's how they're getting around in the environment, some 5-year-old vulnerability that no one's patched or cared about, and those sort of things.
Hmm.
So, on that note, so across the instance you studied, what are the biggest lessons organizations still haven't internalized about effective incident response?
I think, in particular from an executive point of view, what's the question they're asking? And the one question I'm always being asked, not sure if it happens to you, and is always, what's new? And I think that's the wrong question. I think I call it squirrels. Not sure if you have a dog or are familiar with that, where
Yep.
dogs like to hunt squirrels. Do they ever get them? Actually, a friend of mine, her dog, Jake, just got a squirrel and was very excited about that. But that's not what usually happens. Usually, when you're asking for what's new, you're basically already admitting you're behind the curve. It's also like, I always compare it with police officers that just respond to calls. They're always getting to the scene after the culprit left. And as an executive and as a security professional, if you're always asking what's new, you're basically bound to be late. So really what you have to check is, well, what's old? What haven't we covered yet? What are the basic patterns that we have to really identify to protect ourselves?
Yeah, and I think for smaller companies that is really hard to do. The larger companies that has their own dedicated threat and intel groups makes it a lot easier, and there's a lot of great third-party companies. Your Recorded Future and
Yeah.
those type of companies that provide some decent threat intel stuff and all the other notices. But I think it's challenging for those small companies to stay up in front whenever they're so busy internally, just dealing with the normal day-to-day stuff on top of trying to keep an eye out on what's going on.
Yeah.
So what do you think distinguishes organizations that can successfully operationalize threat intelligence from those that simply collect it, other than maybe what we just kind of talked about here?
I think it's really that word operations that makes a difference here. It shouldn't be a fire drill. So it's not where you're looking at threat intelligence as, okay, now I have to go to my firewall and block those IP addresses, which at the time you learn from them, even if you have the most accurate and current threat intel, those IP addresses are no longer really meaningful in any way. So you have to figure out, how do you turn security response into operations? So how do you get busy ahead of the curve here? Uh, I would say the more boring it looks, the more operational it looks, the better, kind of. So it should be a matter of automating it, and with that, basically just making it something that you have a plan, you have a standard procedure. How do you apply these indicators of compromise? Maybe you don't even block them at a firewall. Maybe you look at, what data you have that you're collecting, where you can search for these, like DNS logs or whatever you have available. And then also try to find those visibility gaps where if you learn about a new threat, why can't you operationalize it? Why can't you automate it? And that usually the answer to that is, well, you're missing visibility.
Is there any particular metrics that you kind of favor during those type of things? Things that you look for.
It's not so much a metric per se. Like I don't think it's easy to capture in a number, but I like the idea. And even if you just do it sort of as a tabletop exercise of the sort of red teaming, where you look at, okay, these are the current threat actors that I'm worrying about. So threat modeling, basically, then looking at again, look at your visibility, look at your coverage. How many of these TTPs that these threat actors are using do I actually have visibility for? And it's a little bit like my background is a little bit more so from a developer point of view, like what you talk about code coverage when you're sort of doing testing of code. Your threat model should work similar, where how many of these standard techniques that attacks are using do you detect? Are you able to detect? If not, then what visibility do you have to add? Or if you have visibility like logs that don't apply to any of the threats, and you're just throwing away money and time.
Yeah, and a lot of that also comes around with education, especially on the smaller side or the
Yeah.
smaller organization. So, how do you think cybersecurity education should evolve to keep pace with the complexity of cloud operations and supply chain risk?
I think in particular for smaller organizations, it's down to the basics, like understand how things work. So you're actually able to adapt your defenses to whatever comes next. When I'm teaching intrusion detection, one of the questions that comes up, why don't you just give me all the rules that I need to apply? And many are frustrated by our class goes into all the bits and bytes of network protocols. But I can't tell you what's coming tomorrow, but I can get you ready to understand what's coming tomorrow and then adapt your defenses. And that's really where these basics come in. That's where understanding how software works, understanding network protocols, understanding operating systems, where that really matters.
Yeah, and if you want those rules, that's why there's all the little ISACs and everything where you can pull down a lot of that stuff ahead of time, those IOCs, right? So
yeah.
And so for smaller IT and security teams, what advice do you have to help them defend against the same threats faced by the global enterprises? Because they're facing the same stuff because at least the initial maybe a general attack might not be targeted, and so there's an assumption that it could be a large company or it could be a small company from the attacker standpoint, and they're still going to use the same technology to attack them. So what advice do you have there?
I think first of all, make sure your IT organization matches your size. I sometimes see small shops, bits of startups that have these super complex Kubernetes cloud architectures that they can't possibly manage. They're just way too complex for them. But they think they have to do what Google does because Google, they want to be the next Google kind of. So they figure they have to have the next, the same architecture. Well, Google started out with a couple of duct taped together servers. Kind of. It didn't start out with large clusters and things like this. I think that's the first part is keep it simple, particularly for a small organization. Then the next step is find help if you need to. If you're a small manufacturing company, for example, that may have sort of 200 employees, or just as a rough example, you can't afford a 20-person security team. You may have an IT team, not security team, an IT team of like 5, and or one of that matter, and one of them, if you have the 5, may after lunch, look a little bit into security. So in that case, really find outside help, find consultants, MSSPs that you trust. Of course, now that's an entire other issue. How do you find the right one here? But just realize you can't do it all yourself.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great, even small companies that provides
Mm.
MSP functionality
Yeah,
and can help you monitor, and then also be instant response out there. You know, they're local, they're regional,
yeah,
they're national, so all
yeah.
different prices and sizes and everything too. And so and definitely offset, because then you don't have to worry about 24/7 staffing. They got it all taken care of for you. So
Exactly. They got it taken care of. And they collect all the threat intelligence. You then basically, have to scale. Ideally, if it's an MSSP that specializes a little bit on your industry, because then you learn from your competitors' mistakes through them. That's, I think, always a model that works very well. Find one that's the right size for you. You mentioned smaller ones and regional ones. If you just have one location, and as I think 200 employee sort of size of a small, medium business size, you probably don't want to go with the big national brand necessarily for that service, because then you'll be just that little customer they don't really spend any attention to. Maybe a little bit cheaper, but often it's actually cheaper to go with the smaller regional local one than with the big one.
yeah, and you know the likelihood that you might get the attention that you deserve
Yeah,
is probably
yeah,
not there, like you said. You know, you're the small fish in a big sea,
yeah.
and so it definitely helps if you can kind of right size with the same size of your organization. So
And particularly with the big MSSPs or whatever you want to call them, so security providers, uh, one problem I see with the big ones is they don't understand your business.
mhm.
Where you basically have a bunch of people that look at logs from hundreds of companies. All of them are different, and yeah, they either miss stuff, or what I've also seen is they just give you these outrageous false positives and send you on wild goose chases where nothing really comes of it.
Yeah, and the other thing too, if they're servicing Fortune 500 companies,
Yeah,
your logs are going to get lost in their logs, and
yeah, yeah,
you may never see anything out of it and stuff too.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, so yeah. Um, as far as technical skills or in the various domains, do you believe we will be most critical for security professionals over the next 5 years, or what domains do you think will be most critical?
Um, my personal favorite is here, and it's a little bit playing favorites here, is sort of the entire software supply chain security. I think that's a huge untapped market in some ways. There are a lot of solutions, but none of them really work at this point. So
Hmm.
I think there will be a lot of adaptation that has to have happened. There's a lot of innovation waiting there. AI, of course, plays in here too, but I think in part, of course, AI right now is the new shiny toy, the new squirrel that people are chasing,
Yeah.
not realizing that it's really just the old stuff again.
Yeah. And I think DLP is going to
Yeah,
become more and more critical as AI continues to grow.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
you know, being able to monitor and look out for, you know, what's happening with your data as it's moving around your environment. So I'm hoping to see better DLP controls coming out of a lot of these companies
yeah.
nowadays. So
Yeah, and that's really one of the big problems I think that people just don't understand or have realized yet is that once your data is in an AI model, there is no more access control.
mhm.
And sort of back to the basics. Authentication, access control, your auth and auth C. We fight those battles with web apps like for the last 30 years. And now it just follows that into these AI tools where the AI tool does not understand access control. And yeah, with that, once the data is in that big pool, doesn't really matter where it came from.
Yeah. And are you doing a lot in your classes now? Are you doing a lot of uh, teaching around AI
Mhm.
and ethical security or coding of that? Or, you know, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually embedded a lot in our classes because it shouldn't really be necessarily treated as sort of that alien add-on, but it becomes part of security operations, becomes part of developing, and as anything, it has sort of its good and bad sides to it. So you have to basically cover it from both sides. We do have some up and coming classes that are more talking about AI specifically and how to use it like offensive, how to defend it, how to build models. But for the most part, really, I think the embedding it into existing content is where really the difference is going to be made, because then you can make those comparisons. Hey, it's not really that different from what we do already, and how do we actually apply what we do already to these new tools?
Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that you have in your, or that you talk about regularly, is around, the intelligence and things that are coming in. So, how do you think the cybersecurity community better share actionable intelligence without overwhelming the practitioners with
Hmm.
all the noise that's occurring?
Yeah, yeah. So I think one problem sometimes is there's too much duplicate intelligence being shared. We have done years ago some studies based on how different intelligence providers copy from each other, which isn't necessarily bad because you really want to get your intelligence from one source, but it's often not clearly labeled where they copy it from and how old the data is, because it sort of went through that bucket brigade kind of different intelligence providers until it ended up in the one that you happen to use as your source. So I think there's something to be done here to basically more accurately labeling your threat intelligence. And then basically don't get overwhelmed by individual events. Look for patterns. I think most threat intelligence is not really that actionable to most companies. If you're large enough and you do have like an instant response capability in-house, then like closing that loop between instant response and threat intelligence, I think, is critical. That you basically learn from your own mistakes and try to stop or to repeat them. That's for smaller companies where the MSSPs come in, because they can learn from other people's mistakes and then again apply that to you. I think that's what you really want to focus on. And the hardest thing is, and that's something I struggle with too, like when I look at which stories will I cover for today's podcast, is does this particular vulnerability matter? And am I using, how many people are using this particular product, or how severe is the vulnerability? And I haven't found a great simple solution for that yet. But the best you can do is feedback. Basically, did it matter last time I talked about this, or I applied that particular rule? That I think so. Constantly also evaluate the intelligence you receive, how useful it is. Like for the particular data feeds that you get, how many hits do you actually get on them? How many packets are being blocked because you added that to your firewall rule? If you keep paying and not just money for the feed, but also for people to actually operationalize that feed, and it never really triggers, then yeah, it's really useless. And the other part is, even if it triggers, would the attack have been successful? I always say the top 10 in your logs, these are your false positives. Not in the sense they're not attacks, but they're attacks that don't matter. You have your SH brute force attempts. If you still allow logins with admin, threat intelligence is not going to save you.
Right.
You're compromised. So that's, I think, people sort of really have to do that QA on their threat intelligence and learn by closing the loop here to prioritize which threat intelligence actually matters.
Okay. So, one of the things you talk about during your podcast a lot is your honeypots and the data that you're getting out of that.
Yeah.
So what sort of, I guess, how surprised are you with the amount of activity you're seeing on the honeypot? So let's start with that. We'll talk about how, with the activity off of there.
I'm always surprised, and also how it's increasing. Like, I've been doing this now for something like 25 years. And I remember initially, I'm not sure if you remember, there was like a tool called a little Windows firewall that sort of popped up whenever there was an alert, kind of. It gave a little pop-up message. Forgot what it was called, but anyway. And yeah, this became annoying back then. It was sort of like a couple times an hour you got that pop-up message. We track something called the survival time, how long it takes between attacks for a particular IP address, and that's now well below a minute. So a random IP address connected to the internet will receive some form of incoming attack uh, at least once a minute.
Mm-hmm.
For our web honeypots, they actually have like an HTTP request or such. Within a couple minutes, you'll see something coming in. And these are non-advertised, usually home IP addresses and such, so nothing special. When Mirai came out, whenever I gave talks, I sort of did this little demo where I had like one of those DVRs was vulnerable at home, and sort of I just showed the logs in the background while I was introducing myself, and I could guarantee that while I was introducing myself, and I'm usually not spending that much time on telling them how great I am, that there would be an attack, there would be someone logging in, and then I could switch to that and show it. So it always amazes me how much just garbage there is essentially on the internet. And again, these are not really the attacks that you're worried about in that sense as an organization protecting yourself, but they contribute to that smoke screen that you have to get through to actually find what's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know in our firewalls, any given second we'll see 40, 50, some odd
Yeah,
I'll loosely call them attacks, but they're at
yeah,
least sniffing your network. Some of it's just background radiation, right? And
yeah,
others
yeah, yeah.
might be legitimate or something along that line. But for the most part, it just shows that you have no time to make a mistake because someone is there already knocking on your door, or multiple people's knocking on your door automatically.
Yeah, but it also means that there are a lot of attacks that really don't matter.
Yeah.
Even you can make a lot of mistakes before those attacks really matter to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
they are looking at your entire ports,
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's not like, so you might luck out that your
yeah,
mistakes on some off the wall port that's not
yeah,
getting
yeah,
looked at. But if you hit one of the common ones, that's going to up your risk and stuff, definitely. So,
yeah, yeah. And that's where sort of these ideas like the Swiss cheese model and such comes in, where you want to build up those layers. You want to have your diverse, not just redundant, but diverse security controls, where if one of those attacks makes it through one thing, like yes, you have SH listening on port 22, and it's sometimes hard to change. That you're not using passwords, you're using keys,
right.
or you do have some endpoint protection that will cover you. But it's always hard. Is like these 0 days in your network protection devices. That's why initially I mentioned that's really one of the big problems that I'm sort of worried about, that they don't get better.
Yeah. Have you been able to tell from your honeypots on like how many of these might be derived from some sort of AI generated? Have you been able to tell that
Um,
at this point yet,
at
or?
this point, I don't think I would necessarily be able to tell, but I would say the vast majority, as 90 plus, is good old bots.
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier Mirai and whatever they call it these days. Like, it has evolved, but they add more passwords, they add some web vulnerabilities and such to these bots. We see an awful lot that are basically just I won't call it random, but they sort of expand the list of URLs they're looking for. One big attack we're seeing is like they just look for environment variables, files that you may use to store secrets in, and it's more or less the same bot, but they just keep expanding the list of files they're looking for, and that's the vast majority is fairly straightforward. I would say dumb bots that are really just looking for very simple vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and they're just the source to get in, right?
Yeah,
So they're
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
they're they're looking for that initial means, and then phone
yeah,
home, and then
yeah.
second layer or
And
tier two
and
comes in.
for the scanning, you don't really need AI. I don't think AI helps
Right.
you much for the scanning. Um,
I
you
was
get your
thinking more on the
banner.
code generation side of
Yeah, the
things.
code generation, there may be some, but at this point, I don't think would easily be able to tell them apart. I think maybe on the vulnerability analysis, there is some that actually find the initial vulnerability. But for the most part, then people start just copying that code. So that's very
Mhm.
few people that actually will create new vulnerabilities or new exploits, I should say, and find new vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Okay. So, based on your years of leading the Internet Storm Center, what single change do you think would improve the global security posture if it's universally implemented? Big theoretical question there for you. Nothing
Yeah,
loaded at all. So,
I think the one issue that I have often is the notification of victims. I think would make a huge difference if there would be a good way to notify victims, because we have these huge attack networks that use all of these home modems, routers, things like that, that are extremely difficult to really shut down. I call them like the mosquitoes of the internet, kind of. Nobody really feels that threatened by them, but mosquitoes kill more people than sharks and bears and such,
right.
and they're everywhere. I think that would be a huge difference. And we have tried. ISPs have tried. They sort of have a position to do that. Uh, Governments have attempted to do it in some cases, but I think there has been very little progress, and I don't have a solution for this. But this would be sort of a real way to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that communication side of things, where companies are dumping so much data to the federal governments and everything, and there's very little actionable data coming back out of there, it seems. So it's better communications there, I do think would be good. And then,
Yeah, yeah,
also, I think making sure that all consumer internet equipment, facing equipment, auto updates,
yeah,
and even with that,
yeah,
even maybe to some degree the corporate ones, just for the
yeah.
the maybe the lower models or something that might be more of an SMB or small
Mm.
company type models that forces at 2 a.m. an update or something along that line versus some of the
The,
bigger enterprise ones.
that may help, or just reducing attack surface and such. But
Yeah.
that's again, you're notifying users. Uh, there has been some improvement, particularly on the consumer side, actually more than on the enterprise side, with longer have default passwords and have like external admin interfaces turned off by default, and I think that has improved on the consumer side.
I do too.
But it's hard, and one issue of the communication, one reason I sort of see the communication part always fail is the particular consumer side. How do you authenticate who's calling you?
Hmm.
Because then you have immediately any kind of adversary hijack the communication method for like the tech support scams.
Hmm.
And for a consumer, it's pretty much impossible to tell that apart.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things that I do with all my guests, I ask about the same three questions and
Mm,
everything. So just to get everyone's
mm.
approach off of it. So what is something in the security industry that we could do better?
Learn from the past. And I was mentioned, we just had these new AI browsers coming up, and everybody's excited to have prompt injection. What's prompt injection? We're mixing control plane and data plane. We're
Hmm.
mixing data and code. That's buffer overflow. That's cross-site scripting. That's SQL injection. Um, it's the same mistake that we make since we write software, really. So that's I think one thing we really need to do better. We need to learn from the past to not keep making the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah. And I think another one with that is to slow the rush to market down.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Because if it's internet facing or something in that line, especially, or browsers, everything's being done in a browser.
Yeah.
There needs to be more time to debug those things, I think, and just take security more in tune with it. So,
Yeah, I don't think you can slow it down, but I think by learning from the past, you can actually create secure code faster.
yeah.
And I think that really is sort of the difference that you have to make, because in the end, you're not going to prevent vulnerabilities. You have to stay in business. That's the number one priority of any kind of startup, any business, whether it's secure or not. So you have to make it possible to stay in business while creating secure code.
Yeah. So, what's something that you're tired of hearing about?
these vulnerabilities in security devices, in particular the stupid old vulnerabilities. Like when I look at code a couple of years ago of tens of $1,000 security device, and they literally have like last change date from 99 in there. They commented out the input validation for the username instead of fixing it because it was a little bit too tight. I'm sick of seeing those things over and over.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then finally, what are the latest trends in security or privacy that you're actively monitoring? I know you kind of touched on some things a little bit earlier, but anything else?
Certainly it's AI, kind of, because that's what we have to look at these days, and just to see what mistakes are being made there. That's really it for the most part. And maybe a little bit related to that, from our honeypot setups, actively looking for attacks against some of the associated systems, like the data management systems and such. And we have seen over the last few years some interesting attacks there because they're often not set up by IT people. You often have like data scientists and such that set up systems to manage, to basically ingest data and manage it. And those systems are often configured insecure by default, and very insecure by default, and highly valuable for an attacker because that's how they get sort of into the particular system. And along that, it's really the more subtle attacks, like getting an ERP system and changing parameters to alter quotes or things like this versus just encrypting it and holding it for ransom.
Great. So, Johannes, do you want to give a quick plug for your podcast and for your classes and everything? Because I know Sands has helped me out a lot in the past on information that's off there. So I definitely want to be able to take a moment to thank you for all that and being on there. So give you a moment to kind of plug all that.
Yeah, sure. ISE.sans.edu. That's the website where the Internet Storm Center, and the podcast is daily. It's 5 minutes. Obviously, makes you sound smarter when you come to work. It's sort of timed around morning commute, usually when people listen to it, and that's sort of what I'm going for here. This weekend, I was talking at B-Sides in Augusta. Someone told me that it saved their company multiple $1 million because they learned about attacks and actually were able to prevent them by listening to the podcast. So if you want to sound smarter, if you want to save millions of dollars, then listen to it. And you can also find out more of the classes at sans.org.
Great. Yeah, I know. I know my team always hates it whenever I come in on the days I drive in because I'm listening to your podcast and a couple others, and it's like, hey, we need to do this, and then they're going, oh, he's listening to the podcast again today.
Yeah.
So, well, Johannes, thank you very much for being part of the Cyber Executive Podcast. I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing you again in the morning, and as I listen to your next podcast. So, thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And for everyone else, thanks for hanging out with us today on this episode of the Cyber Executive. If you like what you heard, hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app, and don't be shy. Share it with your friends. The more, the merrier. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.